Li He, and welcome to In Taiwan We Speak. I am Alexander Shin, and today in Taiwan we speak Taigi, also known as Taiwanese. It's the second most spoken language in Taiwan after Mandarin, and a native or ancestral language of the absolute majority of Taiwan's population. I am joined today by Dr. Lîm Ka-î, or Liz Lim, a researcher of Taigi at the National Academy for Education Research, and one of the key people behind many major projects, past and ongoing, that made possible the current level of Taigi's revival, promotion, and research. Greetings, Dr. Lim, and thank you so much for joining me. We usually open our conversation with the guests sharing something in their language. Would you like to share something as well?
I will read a poem. The author is Taiwanese poet Professor Li Qinhua. The title is 母語的樹話, which means the branches of mother tongue. 你的樹話予人壓制，倒佇塗骹，點出一個真水的死亡姿勢，敢若活的姿勢。有歌語詞的葉仔，猶原佇無偌遠的所在，在等待轉來厝裡團圓。想象你摔落來的瞬間，一聲真疼的哀叫。拍算斷開進前，有淡薄仔遺憾，淡薄仔哀傷，怨嘆予人吞打，閣予家己人看無目地。母語的樹話，母語的化石，甲語言的 DNA 加好調咧，總有一天閣活轉來，親像世界上遐個有志氣的母語，閣醒起來的語言。
Of course, I do not understand a word of it, but just from the way it sounds, I think it sounds very beautiful. Could you please tell me more about this poem and the meaning that you think Professor Li put into this poem?
The poem compares the mother tongue to broken branches. Words are kind of like scattered leaves, just waiting to come back together. By using this metaphor, the author expresses the sadness of how the mother tongue is fading away. But in the end, this still expresses hope for the revival of the mother tongue. Would you read the English?
Oh yeah, you mentioned earlier that Professor Li shared the English translation that he did himself with you. I think it's very beautiful, and of course I would love to read it. I'm not particularly talented in reading poetry, but I'll try. Your branch was torn down and strewn upon the earth. You display a beautiful pose in death, as though you were alive. Some foliage of words still await a homecoming, a reunion from a short distance away. Imagine the moment that you fell. Imagine that you cried out in bitterness before dying, with a little bit of regret, a little bit of sadness, resentment about life being trampled upon and being looked down on by your own kind. A branch of mother tongue, a fossil of mother tongue, hold the DNA of language tightly. Hopefully, someday you will rise again as those languages in the world that awaken with determination. It's a very beautiful poem.
Yeah, it's very, very beautiful.
Dr. Lim, before we dive into this discussion, I think we should start with the basics, and that is, of course, the name of the language. From the way I experience it, I see a lot of people, even those living here in Taiwan, truly confused about how to call this language. Now, in this show, I mostly call it Taigi, but please do tell us, what are some of the other ways to call this language?
Under normal circumstances, how is language named? Typically, the language most widely spoken in a region is named after the specific area. In this case, the language spoken by most people in Taiwan is called Taiwanese, which is quite natural. That's also how I refer my language in English. That is Taigi in Taiwanese.
You know, I've also heard people use words like Hoklo or Minnan in English when referring to Taigi. What is your stance on those specific terms?
The term Hoklo is how Hakka people refer to my ethnic group. Some people in certain regions have adopted this name and pronounced it in Taiwanese, Hoklo way. But Namgi means Minnan language or Southern Ming language in English. In the early 20th century, when modern linguistics entered China, Chinese linguistics began categorizing the languages within China into different regional languages, leading to the identification of a Ming language region. Basically, within the Ming language family, there's a specific language subfamily called Southern Ming. In 1949, the ROC government fled to Taiwan. Back then, both the government and the public, following the principle I mentioned earlier, named the language spoken by most locals in the area based on its geographical name, calling it Taigi or Taiwan way, which means Taiwanese. Later on, for the sake of governance and political purpose, the government needed to establish a Chinese identity among the people of Taiwan. One of the methods was renaming of Taiwanese to Southern Ming dialect. From a linguistic perspective, Southern Ming language is actually a family that encompasses several different languages beneath it. In academic terms, the term Taiwanese Southern Ming has emerged. The term Southern Ming language symbolizes to some extent the oppression of the Taiwanese people by the Kuomintang, Chinese nationalist party, that fled from China. Consequently, those who speak Taiwanese hope to revert to the original name Taigi or Taiwan way for their language. However, conflicts among different ethnic groups arise as some Hakka and indigenous people oppose the use of Taiwanese. They believe that all languages spoken in Taiwan are Taiwanese. However, the reality is that Taiwanese languages and Taiwanese refer to different concepts. Some argue that the Taiwanese indigenous languages are the true Taiwanese. Yet, when people got used to calling this place Taiwan, Taiwanese had already become the most commonly spoken language here. This reflects ethnic and political issues, and they are very difficult to resolve. If Taiwanese isn't accepted, I believe calling this language Taigi could be feasible, which is literally Taiwanese language in Taiwanese pronunciation. Last year, the Ministry of Culture suggested using Taiwan Taiyu in Mandarin, which means Taiwanese Taiwanese. Yes, Taiwanese Taiwanese. It's a bit ridiculous, but somewhat inevitable. Additionally, Hokkien way is the term used in Southeast Asia for this language. People who speak Southern Ming language migrated from Hokkien to Southeast Asia and then spread Hokkien way worldwide through trade.
That's very complicated. So you're suggesting basically that we should use the word Taiwanese for Taigi, but since there's no consensus among different groups, Taigi is also acceptable in English.
Yes. We just drop the Taiwanese, use Taigi in English. That's okay. Or Taigi, that's okay.
Yeah, because in English you cannot read the tones.
Yeah.
But not Taiwanese Taigi.
Yeah. That's strange.
All right. You also mentioned that by the end of the 18th century, Taigi was already the most widely spoken language in Taiwan. Of course, things changed when the Japanese colonization started, and then KMT's Chinese nationalist policies lasted until 1980s when Taiwan democratized. Thinking about those time periods, what are some of the policies that you think were the most detrimental to the language's use?
Both governments have implemented national language movements. During the Japanese era, the intense national language promotion occurred around the time of the Pacific War, continued until the end of the war in 1945. Since it's only been 10 years, a relatively short period, the impact is not significant. The main influence of the Japanese era on Taiwanese was Taiwan entered modernization within a Japanese-speaking environment, and during that time, many new words were borrowed from Japanese and retained within Taiwanese. During the period of the KMT government, due to the Chinese Civil War, Taiwan was positioned as an anti-communist base. Similar to the Japanese government, a national language movement was implemented for administrative convenience. However, unlike Japan, this era of suppressing local languages lasted a long time and had a significant impact, even to this day. Its main influence was observed in two aspects. Firstly, Mandarin became the sole language in the public domain, such as in schools, government institutions, and workplaces, pushing native languages of the people into the private domain. Secondly, through the media, native languages were stigmatized, leading people to disassociate from their mother tongue. Such policies spanning two generations have resulted in the majority of present-day Taiwanese children being unable to speak Taiwanese.
So you're mentioning that Taiwanese was pushed into private domain because
Yes.
it was banned in education, in media. But today, when Taiwan is a free democratic society, do we know how many people speak Taiwanese? What is the size of the Taiwanese speaking community here?
In the 2010 population and housing census, there was a section called Language Usage, which included a question about the most frequently spoken language at home. Among those born before 1945, 71.4% used Taiwanese as their primary language at home, and 5.7% used a combination of Taiwanese and Mandarin. For individuals born between 1986 and 1994, the percentage using Taiwanese dropped to 22.3% and 19.1% using a combination of Taiwanese and Mandarin. In other words, it's like a 10% drop every 10 years. There's another survey conducted by Professor Tâi Hokkien in 2017. According to this survey, among students in elementary and junior high school, only 22.41% considered their Taiwanese listening skills as very fluent, and only 16.84% considered their Taiwanese speaking skills as very fluent. Similar to many endangered languages, generally speaking, urban areas are worse than rural areas. That's a common perception that people in the southern area of Taiwan have better Taiwanese language skills compared to those in the north. But I believe this applies mainly to middle-aged and elderly individuals. The younger the people are, the weaker their Taiwanese language skills tend to be.
When people say that 70 or 80% of Taiwanese population claim that Taiwanese is their mother tongue, but yet not everyone speaks it, right? And
Yes.
with that said, we've actually reached the end of our episode. Join us next week as we continue our conversation with Dr. Lîm Ka-î. Thank you everyone for tuning in. My name is Oleg, and this was In Taiwan We Speak, your audio guide to Taiwan's mind-blowing linguistic diversity. See you next week.